Bible, and you'd find it helpful to follow along, please feel free to turn in it to Luke, the 19th chapter. This is where we'll be spending our time. I want everybody, to think for just a moment about the worst person you can think of. What would that be? No, don't say it out loud, just think. What's the worst person? When you think about someone who's perhaps evil or corrupt, maybe a thief, maybe a pedophile, a corrupt politician, or maybe even worse than that, a corrupt politician who's a pedophile. I mean, whatever, you picture in your mind the worst person. Well, in the Jewish society, the worst human debris was the tax collector. Because the tax collector was seen as a traitor to his own people, and not just a traitor or a collaborator with the Romans, but one who actually profited by collaboration and being a traitor. Let's take a look at the text. In chapter 19, verse 1, Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through, and there was a man there by the name of Zacchaeus, who was the chief tax collector. He was wealthy. And Zacchaeus wanted to see who Jesus was, but he was short, and he couldn't see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed up a sycamore fig to see Jesus as he passed by. When Jesus reached the spot where Zacchaeus had climbed the tree, Jesus looked up at Zacchaeus and said, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So Zacchaeus came down at once and gladly received Jesus. All the people saw this and began to mutter to themselves, "Jesus has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner." But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I'll pay back 4 times that amount." And Jesus said to Zacchaeus, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save that which is lost." So this is an interesting text because in it, Jesus is having the last actual kind of personal encounter with one person that he's going to have before he goes to the cross. His next stop, he's on his way to Jerusalem. He's coming up through Jericho to gain Jerusalem, and this is going to be one of his last real stops along the way. He's on his way to be arrested, to have a trial, 2 or 3 trials actually, and then to be convicted and then crucified, all of which he knows. Jericho was an important city. It was a beautiful place, according to Josephus, who wrote the history of the Jews and the Jewish wars. He describes it, he said it had nicknames. One of them was the City of the Palms, because it had all these beautiful date palms standing, big stand of date palms. It was called the City of Balsams because of all the balsam trees. And Josephus said also it was called the Divine City. It was so pretty that people just spoke of it in very high terms. And it was also a place of great taxation. There were 3 places taxes were collected in Judea. You take the whole of Israel. See, Israel is Israel, but at this time in history, it's just a vassal of the Roman Empire. It's part of the Roman Empire. It's one of the regions that Rome possesses. And they collected taxes in Capernaum, Jerusalem, and Jericho. Now, taxation. I know I've talked to you about the history of taxation, but I want to go into some details here because it's interesting. The Romans were very clever. They didn't send somebody to the houses throughout a region. The guys that wear the helmets that had the shoe brushes on top and the capes and the robes and the spears and the shields and everything else. They didn't do that because they knew that people would resent that. So what they did was they had what was known as a farm system for taxes. Literally, the Romans called it farming. They were farming the population for revenue. And the way they did it was they hired somebody on the basis of a bid. You didn't just go into the Roman official's office and say, "I want to put in for tax collector." No, you paid them for the privilege of collecting the tax. You bid for it, and the highest bidder got the job. Well, you're bidding for a golden goose. and a cash cow when you do that, and everybody knew it. Nobody knew exactly what the tax system was. There was only one tax that everybody knew, and that was the head tax. Imagine, you're taxed because you are. It was called the head tax. You have a head, you pay a tax. When you no longer have a head, you don't owe it anymore. So that's the way it worked. It was 3%. I like that. I'd pay that today in a heartbeat, wouldn't you? 3%, man. It's really good. But there were lots of other taxes just like us. I mean, if you go to Walmart and you see or let's say Harvey's. Nobody likes steaks from Walmart. We'll say Harvey's. You see a big, juicy ribeye there. 2 pounds. A big one. And it's USDA Select. And you look at the price of it and it says $16. 40% of that is taxes. 40% of that steak is nothing but, and it's not just the tax on the steak, it's the tax on the farm, it's the tax on the cattle, it's the tax on the butcher, it's the tax on the truck, all through the life of that steak when it goes from the cow out there grazing to the package in Walmart. 40% of the cost of that steak is taxes. We don't see those taxes. Well, in the Roman Empire, they didn't see a lot of taxes like that. People wandered about wondering, what do I owe? And nobody was really sure. So you can see, now think of it, the way the tax collectors got paid, they didn't get a salary. There was a certain figure that was assessed for a region. Zacchaeus' region was Jericho and the surrounding villages. However they divvied that up. He was the tax collector for those areas. And the way he was paid was anything he collected above what they required was his to keep. Now stop and think what kind of business that is. I mean, man, just figure out what you want to make and you can just take it because they're going to give it to you. I mean, nobody at that time in history would resist the taxes. This is an interesting narrative. It's linked to the previous two, really. You had the blind man who was made to see. Well, Zacchaeus is blinded by his wealth. He's going to be able to see. And the rich ruler prior to this was blinded by his wealth. And he's going to be blind. Zacchaeus is going to be set free from the blindness that he has via his wealth. So you've got two features here that are tying this in to the previous text. The text tells us something else about Zacchaeus. He's not just a tax collector, he's the tax collector. The word in the Greek is arche. He is the chief, the king, the supervisory, whatever you want to put to it, he's the boss. He's the one. And he doesn't collect taxes, personally. He doesn't collect them. He hires others, and they go out, his minions, and they collect the tax. And now stop and think. They have the same rules. If you go out and this person, here's how it would work. Let's just say, for instance, you're on the Appian Way, and you got a cart with 2 mules in front of you, 2 donkeys. The tax collector could stop you and say, 1, 2, 3, 4 wheels. Okay, there's a tax on each wheel. If you had a 2-wheel cart, it was less, but a 4-wheel cart, there's tax on each wheel. You got 2 donkeys, so there's a tax on each donkey. Nobody knew what that was. There's no radio, there's no TV, there's no newspaper, there's nothing. Everybody just says, well, what do I owe? And that tax collector could tell them anything. Those tax collectors would farm taxes like that. They would bring all the proceeds back to Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus would then pay the Roman government what was owed, and everything that was over, he divided amongst the tax collectors and kept some for himself. So you can imagine how a person could get pretty well to do. I mean, when you're farming money from, wouldn't you like to be able to go out and just drive through Waycross or Ware County and say, give me $10? I have 35,000 people. You do the math. You'd have a lot of money at the end of the week. That's what the tax collectors could do. And you can see an incentive for extortion everywhere here. What's wrong with this picture? It's like being at your house. Just imagine yourself. You're sitting at the house and the doorbell rings. And you get up and you open the door and there's Arnold Schwarzenegger. And he's got 4 guys behind him in black outfits, and every one of them's carrying an AK-47. He says, "Come on, pay the tax." You're going to pay it, right? It'd be a shame for you to lose your house. So here's Zacchaeus. He goes downtown to meet Jesus. This is a stupid thing to do. This is one of the stupidest things Zacchaeus could do. You had a whole group of Jews who were called the Zealots. And their favorite thing to do was stick tax collectors with knives. They were called the dagger bearers. And the Jews knew who they were. They didn't hide. And the Romans didn't care. I mean, if somebody had stuck Zacchaeus with a knife in Judea, in Jericho, what's Jericho? The Roman Empire, it's hundreds of miles away. They don't care that somebody sticks one of their tax collectors, they'll just get another. Hey, now somebody else can bid for the office. We get more money and we get the same taxes anyway. So these guys were doing this with the full weight and power of the Roman legions behind them. Everybody's going to pay. Everybody's going to pay. And the Jews hated them because look at what they're doing. Not only are they collaborating with the hated Romans, but they're actually making a profit from the collaboration. So when a zealot came and stuck one of these guys and killed him, everybody in the Jewish crowd would just gather around in front of the guy laying on the ground so that nobody could see him. We're happy about that. And the Romans just kind of looked the other way. So Zacchaeus, this is stupid beyond measure. This is like taking yourself to the worst part of downtown Atlanta and making yourself a sweatshirt out of $100 bills and then chaining yourself to a lamppost at 2 o'clock in the morning. I mean, that's what this is like. So Zacchaeus, what's he doing there? That's the thing. The text says he just wanted to see Jesus, but for me, I look at it and I say, why is that important? I mean, if you got everything, you're wealthy, why do you want to put yourself at jeopardy like this to come and see Jesus? Why is it important to you? That's where we have to think just a little bit. Look at the reaction of the crowd when Jesus encounters Zacchaeus and is going to go home with him for lunch. This man, Jesus, is going home with a sinner. This is what they thought of Zacchaeus. You see, the tax collectors, everybody hated them and they knew it. Nobody wanted to be you didn't go to the tax collector's house for dinner, and the tax collectors didn't come to other people's houses for dinner because nobody wanted to be with them. Everybody in the Jewish community hated the tax collectors. And so think about Zacchaeus for a minute. He knows that. He knows that he's hated. And you can see it in his admission. If I've defrauded anybody, I'm going to pay him back 4 times as much. Why does he say that? Because he had, and he knew it. So he's come to a place in his life where the fact that he's hated, he's aware of it. Imagine being wealthy in your wildest dreams, whatever those are. I don't know what they are. Everybody's dreams, some are wilder than others. But just think about it. Whatever you'd like to be in terms of wealthy, and you can't go anywhere and enjoy it. You can't go out to dinner. You can't go to a restaurant. You can't go outside very much because you're placing yourself at risk of being killed, and you know that everybody in the world hates you where you live. But you wanted that money enough that you're willing to trade a reputation in the community for the money. God is never mocked. Our conscience is the part of who we are made in God's image, wherein God can speak to our conscience, and he's not going to let us go. So Zacchaeus' conscience is speaking to him, and God is using the tools of the hatred that the community feels towards Zacchaeus to prick his conscience. Augustine said it well. He said of that, 4th century, it's a severe mercy that God hurts us to bring us back sometimes, or to bring us anyway. Augustine was a good-looking guy. I don't know if you knew this or not. I've never seen him. Nobody's ever seen a real picture of Augustine. This is back in the days when there were no ways, the 400s, 300s AD. I mean, who can take a picture? But he, according to himself, had a lot of women that thought really highly of him. And he thought highly of women. And he prayed. After he was a believer, he prayed, God, make me pure, make me chaste, but just not yet. His conscience, this severe mercy of the conscience, was working on Zacchaeus. That's why he's downtown. That's why he's willing to take this chance, just to see Jesus. Somehow, God has spoken to this child of Abraham, as Jesus calls him, and given him the conscience to know that Jesus has something that I need. He knows it. Proverbs chapter 12 says this. It says, verse 25, that even a strong person is worn down by a broken heart or a sad heart. Zacchaeus has a sad heart, so he does what he can do. He can't see Jesus, so he runs ahead, climbs a tree, like a little kid. I mean, it's like a child here. He's so desirous that something would happen that would change his life. He's willing to do all this. Okay, so he climbs a tree. There he is, and he's looking, he sees Jesus. And Zacchaeus' worst nightmare. Have you ever had a dream? I had one just a few weeks back. Have you ever had a dream where you waked up and you go, it was only a dream. It's not real. It's not the way things really are. This is Zacchaeus' worst nightmare. Jesus walks up and says, Zacchaeus, it's over. He's seen. He knows that now everybody knows he's up in the tree. He probably had dreams about being found by the mob, right? And the dagger bearers sticking him full of holes. And Jesus is not just on a lunch break. He's coming through town on a mission. And he stops his mission and makes Zacchaeus his mission for that moment. Well, what's going to happen here? What's going to happen is just what Jesus said. The camel is fixing to go through the eye of the needle. That's what's going to happen. Zacchaeus comes down. Jesus says, I must stay at your house. Not I would like to, or could we go have a meal? I must. So this is a mission for Jesus. This is not just some random event. And the crowd is just mortified, which tells me just how dangerous a moment this is for Zacchaeus. Jesus is going home with that guy? How easy it is that we don't look at people in the way that God looks at people. It's so easy for us to, that's why I said when I started, think of the worst person you can think of. We see people with our human eyes. We see them for who they are. We don't see them in the way that God sees them. And lots of times after they're born again, we don't see them that way either. We still see what we see. I had a dream once. I've only had 2 of these in my life where I really believed the dream was something that God gave me. It's only happened to me twice. And this is one of them. The dream was, and you may not be interested. If they're not interested in this, just take a nap and I'll call you when I get done with this part of the sermon so you can wake back up. But the dream went this way. I first went to sleep. And then once I was asleep, I was in a game show. It was one of these reality TV shows where people are made to climb stuff that's really hard to climb and jump across stuff that's too far to jump. And you see these shows where there's a lot of these are from Japan like this, where people look at me like they're getting hurt. I mean, it looks like that when they jump and they hit it and fall back because they bounce off the thing they were supposed to jump on, it looks like it hurts. Well, that's the way this was. So first, I had to go across this rope bridge. It was a rope overhead and one rope between my feet. And I had to, balance and make my way across a place where there was a bunch of spiky stuff sticking up so that if you fell, you were just going to be skewered. And I made it. And the next thing I had to do, I had to go across this river where the water was really high, current was really fast, and you had to get through it or you'd be swept over a waterfall. And I made that. And the next thing I had to do is I had to climb this rock that was covered, water was coming down, and it was really slippery. And there were just little handholds. And that part of the dream lasted longer than the rest of it. But I made it to the top. But when you got to the top, there was a sword laying on the ground. It was a bright silver sword, and you were supposed to pick this up because once you got to the top of the mountain, right there was a dragon. Now, it's a dream, so come on, it's a dream. Stuff happens like that in a dream. So you're supposed to pick the sword up, and on the top of the dragon's head was this diamond-shaped opening. And your goal is to jump on the dragon, which is kind of scary, and then drop the sword in the diamond-shaped opening. And I did it. I won the game show. The next scene in the dream was I was in a parade because I'd won the game show. And the dragon was walking with me. And the reason was, I just understood all this in the dream. The dragon was made placid by the fact that the sword was dropped into the spot. He was changed. But as we were walking, people were standing on the sides of the road and they were throwing rocks and bottles and trash at me and at the dragon. Why? They didn't believe the dragon was changed. We're like that. This was the way it came to me. We're like that. We see people and we just don't believe that they're changed, even though they have been. Zacchaeus was changed. I know that these people who saw Zacchaeus that day, they didn't believe it because Jesus was going home to the home of one who they called a sinner. But Zacchaeus, look at what happens to him. He knows the law. He's a good Jewish boy. They knew what they were expected to do. If you cheated somebody, you were supposed to pay them back twice. He says, I'll pay 4 times back. He goes beyond what he's required to do. Why? Because he was changed. He was filled up with something that was beyond anything that his wealth could acquire for him. He was radically changed. Remember Saul, who became Paul. Remember what some of the churches said? This is Saul. He sent families to prison and to their deaths because they're Christians. Can we trust him to come into our midst? Nobody was sure about him. But this is one of the beautiful things about surrendering your life to Jesus. When you surrender your life to Jesus, and it really is the real thing, you become a completely different person. Your heart is so gripped by God that everything about who you are begins to change. And that's what happened to Zacchaeus. And trusting a person like that is no issue at all. They can be trusted. And here's the second part of this text that speaks to me in terms of what Zacchaeus has done here. What Zacchaeus did was he took the things that were most important to him. Remember the rich ruler came to Jesus. Jesus says, I've obeyed all the law. Remember that a couple of weeks back. I've obeyed everything. I've done it since I was a little kid. Jesus says, that's awesome. There's still something you lack. Sell everything you have, give it to the poor, and follow me. And he walked away sad. Zacchaeus didn't walk away sad. He volunteered to do all of this. And I'm going to say to anybody, no matter who we are, and this includes me, if we really say, do we say to ourselves, I really want to be all of who God would have me to be. I really want to grow that way. That's good. But if it's going to happen, then we're going to have to lay everything that's important to us on the altar. Everything. Zacchaeus, I say this to myself, Zacchaeus this day grew past many, including me, who say they're followers of Jesus, because he was willing to lay everything on the altar that day. What about us? I don't know where everybody is today, but if I've said anything about which you've got a question, you want to pray with me, I'll stay here as long.